You're not the first to attempt a project like this, and with Pearson's efforts forthcoming, probably won't be the last. Wilfred Rhodes has inspired, from Neville Cardus to J.M. Kilburn in particular, some of cricket's most imperishable prose, and as you mentioned earlier, a previous biography. So here's your chance to give us a hard sell, I suppose. What does your book do that his doesn't, and what does it do better?
Well, there's the Rogerson book and also the A. Thompson book on Hurst and Rhodes, which both came out in the early 50s, within 12 months of each other. And they're both very useful, interesting books. I'd say the Thompson one is more Cardusian than it's certainly not driven by dedication to the facts, but he is and can be a lovely writer. And actually, the subtitle of the book I nicked from A. Thompson.
He did write the same book about 15 times, didn't he, AA?
Yeah, he did. He did. I mean, yes. So that's a fair enough comment, I think. You said it, not me. The Rogerson book was never claiming to be exhaustive, but Rogerson did know Rhodes and talked to him, and didn't talk to him as much as I think he claimed, because a lot of the Rogerson's supposed personal insights were nicked from the Yorkshire Evening Post articles, as I rather annoyingly found out when I was going through them and thinking, that's in the Rogerson book. But Rogerson did have some, I thought, some very, very good and interesting technical insights into how Wilfred bowled and what his methods were. And I think Wilfred did quite like Rogerson, because he felt that Rogerson understood him and understood what he was about. So there were those two books. Cardus, of course, wrote he wrote The Wisdom Obituary. He wrote a long essay about him in his first book. I think he was one of Cardus's great heroes, without any doubt. But Cardus, yeah, he wrote essays or he wrote articles. Harry Pearson's writing has written this book that's coming out in April about the three of them, Hurst, Rhodes and Hay. So I think that'll be a slightly different, I don't know what it's going to be like. I'm sure it'll be very good, but it's a slightly different approach. Mine is, I suppose, a full-on thumping biography of Wilfred. As some people will know, he played more first-class games than anybody else has ever played. He batted more than anybody else has ever batted. He took more wickets than anybody else has ever taken. He's the only person ever to play Test cricket in 5 decades. I mean, just those 4 things make him one of the, there you go, one of the colossuses of the, is it colossi or colossuses of the game? And I didn't set out to sort of think, well, I've got to write 450 pages. He deserves that. I did look at the Leo McKinstry book of Jack Hobbs and think, well, it's got to be up there with it. I mean, this Rhodes's career is considerably more, not more significant, but considerably bigger than Jack Hobbs's, because he batted and bowled. And it didn't ever seem that that it was going to fit into anything less than that. And I would make the point, as you saying I'm selling it, I don't go into long, convoluted details about matches. You know that you've read it. I would say there's probably 3-4 games in his whole career, all Test matches, where I do go into quite a lot of detail. The famous 1926 comeback Test, where he was recalled to the team when he was 48. Yeah, I go into a lot of detail about that. It was one of the great games of Ashes history, and Wilfred was right in the middle of it. The 1902 Will Get 'em in singles game at the Oval. Obviously, I go into detail about that, partly just to prove that they never said that. I think his greatest performance in Australia, I think it was Melbourne, taking 5 for 94 on a completely flat wicket, where the other bowlers, I think, managed 3 for 200. Bowling against Victor Trumper, as probably his greatest ever bowling performance. He did in the following game on a wet wicket take 15 for, I can't remember what, 15 for 100 or something. He said the one on the good wicket was better. So I haven't gone into massive detail about game after game after game. I have tried to talk a lot about how I think, and I know you were interested about how I think he got his wickets, which is something that's worth talking about because I think I've figured it out. I mean, yeah, he was a spin bowler, but it's a bit more complicated than that. There's a fair bit about society because I think he was driven by society. There's a fair bit about stuff like the First World War, which of course interrupted his career, about his background. And then after he retired, his work as a coach at Harrow, which was certainly not the high point of his career. He wasn't very good at it, basically. And then all the stuff later about his blindness. He started suffering with eye problems in the mid-30s, and it went untreated, basically. He went to a couple of very bad optometrists, as far as I can gauge. It was glaucoma, and it wasn't really addressed until it was too late. And he went completely blind in the early 50s, lived for another 20 years after that, and attended all to cricket matches. And that is a part of his life that many people are aware of. The famous stories about Wilfred knew what was going on the field, even though he couldn't see. There's a certain amount of exaggeration about that because it's not true. He could tell certain things, but you know, he wasn't clairvoyant. He did have people with him telling him what was going on and telling him the fielding positions. His granddaughter, who was told me about what that was like, she always felt a bit diffident about it because she said, I don't know enough about cricket. He knows I don't. He was also a really charming story. The managing director of the Decca Corporation, which still exists, they were the first people to make transistor radios, and the chairman or managing director, I can't remember who it was, made sure that Wilfred was one of the first ever to get a transistor radio, so he could listen to the radio while he was at the test matches. But he loved just sitting there, listening to the sounds, bit of radio, bit of instruction, and chatting to people, George Hurst and anybody else who came along, and people like Len Hutton, SF. But I mean, I've got pictures in the book of him watching games with Barnes, with Woolley, with Len Hutton, with George Hurst. It was a huge and significant feature of his life right up to his death. His last game was at Dean Court in Bournemouth, a Benson and Hedges, of all things, a Benson and Hedges zonal game. But he had a chat with Barry Richards at that. David Frith took him to the game. He only stayed for a couple of hours, but he loved being there. It was, you know, he dedicated his whole life to it. Yeah.